Now, I had initially thought that I would, go through the whole story of Noah in chapter 7 to 9, but as I was doing a study in chapter 7, it seems like there's so much in there that it's best to just focus on that chapter alone for today, and then we shall try and finish chapter 8 and 9 in our next meeting. Okay. So let's begin in chapter 7, verse 1. And the Lord said unto Noah, Come thou and all thy house into the ark, for thee have I seen righteous before me in this generation. I think this word ark, by the way, is used, of course, for also the Ark of the Covenant. And as we know later on, we shall see that God made a covenant with Noah as well. So I think, this, the word ark, in this case of the ark that Noah built, obviously it was some type of floating vessel in which which God used to preserve, both mankind and the beasts. But also the Ark of the Covenant that was in the temple, that is even greater. So brings, that points to the greater salvation. In the case of Noah, it was the flesh that was saved, but it is the other ark, in which God's promises, upon which sat what was called the mercy seat, that the salvation of God that would later be brought to us through his mercy would be revealed, so that's interesting that both these were called, Noah's boat was called an ark, and then of course that was the ark in the temple of God, which contained the Ten Commandments and also some other some other things that God had considered to be holy were placed in it. All right, that's just a little aside about the word ark for itself. But in the case of Noah, that just simply means like, a vessel that floats. And the Lord said unto Noah, Come thou and all thy house into the ark, for thee have I seen righteous before me in this generation. So in our study in chapter 6, I had disproven the false teaching that Noah was saved by God to preserve his bloodline, which many are teaching unto this day was a pure bloodline. And that's what they say, it was to preserve this bloodline from which Jesus was come, and such things. I already talked about that in detail in chapter 6. I'm not going to go into those details here, but I do want to say that Noah was a righteous man, as we read in Genesis chapter 6, 9. And what 6, 9 tells us is these are the generations of Noah. Noah was a just man and perfect in his generations, and Noah walked with God. Noah is called the just man, which means a righteous man. The word just in Genesis 6, 9 is the Hebrew word sadiq, which is H6662 in Strong's Concordance, and it means righteous. Okay, so Strong defines it as just, lawful, righteous man. The word perfect, as used in Genesis 6, 9, means upright. Again, it has nothing to do with bloodlines. Like his great grandfather Enoch, Noah walked with God. Again, which we can read about in Genesis 6, 9, that Noah walked with God. That is, he had a relationship with God through his faith in God, not because of his bloodlines. This is why God saved him, just as he saved Enoch, who was Noah's great grandfather. Now, God's word is perfect, and in Genesis 7, 1, God confirms the reason why Noah was chosen by him. God saw Noah as righteous, which in this verse is the exact same word that is translated just in Genesis 7, 1. God confirms the reason why Noah was chosen by him. God saw Noah as righteous. You see that? God's word is, again, it'll confirm, especially these kind of teachings which God knew beforehand were going to be very prevalent in this false and fake world, whose God is the father of lies. So God repeats things. So in 7:1, God plainly tells us, and Lord said unto Noah, Come thou and all thy house into the ark, for thee have I seen righteous before me in this generation. God didn't say, I've seen that your blood is pure, so I need to preserve your bloodline, so come into the ark. No, that's not what he said. It just tells us that he saw him as righteous. And that word righteous is the same word, same Hebrew word, sadiq, which is used in Genesis 6:9 in regards to Noah, that he was a just man. Okay, so the word Sadiq means just. So in one case it is said just, it also means righteous. So in the other usage, it is translated as righteous, but it is the exact same word. It is Hebrew H6662. Okay. Therefore, let us not again be deceived by lying teachings that focus on the body. What these bloodlines teachings do, as I taught you in the last week, was that they focus our attention on the body. That Jesus somehow came to save this body. No, he didn't. He didn't come to save the outer man. No, it is the inner man that he came to see, which is to save, which is what God looks upon, as we can read in 1 Samuel chapter 16, verse 7. But the Lord said unto Samuel, look not on his countenance or on the height of his stature, because I have refused him. For the Lord seeth not as man seeth, for man looketh on the outward appearance, but the Lord looketh on the heart. These bloodline teachings divert attention to the flesh. They make the body important while neglecting the heart, the inner man that Christ came and died for, to transform into new creatures in Christ. Christ came to purge our conscience, not our bodies. Okay. And that we can read again in Hebrews 9:14, for example, that he came to purge our conscience. Had these bodies been purged of the evil of death that works in the body, our mortal bodies would never die. If any man had pure blood, as these teachings falsely teach, that person cannot die, because life is in the blood, and if the life is pure, it cannot be destroyed. The blood of Christ cleanses the conscience of man, not the blood of man. And that we can read in one of my favorite verses in the whole Bible, which is Hebrews 9:14. How much more shall the blood of Christ, who through the eternal Spirit offered himself without spot to God, purge your conscience from dead works to serve the living God. In continuing in verse 2 and 3, of every clean beast thou shalt take to thee by sevens, the male and his female, and a beast that are not clean by two, the male and his female. Of fowls also of the air by sevens, the male and the female, to keep seed alive upon the face of all the earth. So in verses 2 and 3, God instructs Noah to preserve alive the beasts of the earth and the fowls of the air. In verse 2, we read of clean beasts, which would suggest that some type of ceremonial religious practices were being observed even before the flood. Okay. Otherwise, how would Noah know what was a clean animal and what was an unclean animal? In my teaching on Genesis 4 about Cain and Abel, I had speculated that the fact that Cain and Abel brought offerings to God, including a possible animal sacrifice by Abel, proves that they had been taught to observe certain rituals or ceremonies that were legalized much later by Moses. See, they already had some type of religious teachings and practices that they were engaged in, going right back to the days of Adam and Eve and of Cain and Abel. Okay. The knowledge of clean and unclean beasts was understood by Noah, as was the practice of animal sacrifices, which seemed to have been instituted by God himself when he clothed Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. And, later by Abel, when he brought the fat of the firstlings of his flock to God, about which we can read in Genesis chapter 4, verse 4. And also after the flood, Noah gave offering of clean beasts and fowl to God, which we will read in Genesis chapter 8 and verse 20. Abraham also offered animal sacrifices, as did the other patriarchs, long before these offerings were ritualized in the law of Moses. So the law of Moses was not the beginning of the instruction of God as far as how man was to, worship him, or to relate to him, or to reverence him, and what type of gifts and offerings that were to be presented to him. Those teachings, that understanding goes, it seems, all the way back to Adam and Eve themselves. Okay. Later on, under Moses, all these were detailed, and they were, they became the law. Okay, but before then it was not the law, but nonetheless, that doesn't mean that those patriarchs and the people before the flood had no knowledge of how they were supposed to approach God and the purpose of these sacrifices and offerings. These sacrifices, first offered by God Himself, are symbolic of the sacrifice of the spotless Lamb of God on the cross of Jesus Christ at a much later time. The understanding that we gain from these nuggets of truth about the pre-flood and the post-flood world is that people, even from those days, had been given knowledge and understanding as how to serve and to reverence God. It also makes sense since they had a direct connection with God. Adam and Eve knew God, their children knew God, Cain and Abel knew God. So they had a direct connection with God at that time. And it makes sense, because they had a direct connection with God, that they would receive instructions directly from Him, as did Noah before and also after the flood. Clean and unclean beasts also point to the fact that the world had been contaminated by evil, which alone can make something unclean. In the beginning of creation, God made angels, the sons of God, men, and He also made beasts. Some point later in time, during the days of the evil angels, and later of the evil sons of God, men like Lucifer, whole species of beasts were brought into existence through genetic modification and experimentation by these evil entities, some of whom later became the evil principalities and powers of our time, whose chief prince is Satan. Of course, I've discussed that also in my History of Evil series about the origin of Satan and of the so-called principalities and powers, generally called demons in our world. Where did they come from? They were not the fallen angels, so-called, the angels that God had made, who originally rebelled against Him and brought evil into His creation. No, these creatures came later, and they were creatures of flesh, but they were died in an age past, and now they continue as disembodied spirit. For example, in Revelation 16, we can read of unclean spirits. I think it's Revelation 16:13. We can read of unclean spirits that look like frogs. Okay. So unclean beasts have existed for a very long time in creation. That the evil principalities and powers of today, they once existed on earth in bodily form, but now continue to exist on the earth in disembodied spirit form. These unclean beasts were introduced in the world of Adam, probably after the sin of Adam and Eve in the garden. Just as thorns and thistles did not appear on the earth till after the sin of Adam. There has to be some kind of, because this clean and unclean, was already differentiated even before the flood. This has to raise the question as to where did these unclean beasts come from? The clean and unclean beasts, of course, ultimately God made them, but they are based upon and patterned after some of these creatures that existed in the past. The clean and unclean beasts are symbolic of the unseen principalities and powers that exist in creation and have existed for a long time, even before Adam was formed and commanded to replenish the earth, just as Noah was commanded by God to replenish it after the flood. The flood of Satan in Genesis 1:2, chapter 1, verse 2, destroyed not just the earth, but also the heavens above, as we can read about in 2 Peter chapter 3, I believe in verse 10 or thereabouts, or in verse 7 maybe. Destroyed not just the earth, but also the heavens above, which is why the heavenly bodies, such as the sun, moon, and the stars, had to be remade on the fourth day in Genesis chapter 1. The flood of Noah only destroyed the earth, okay? More specifically, just the surface of the earth. In both cases, the earth had to be replenished, a job that was first given to Adam and later to Noah. Clean beasts were to come to Noah in sevens, which probably means 7 pairs. It seems like a lot, but if that is what is meant in this verse, then God must have had His reasons for keeping alive so many of these clean beasts. Some teach that the extra pairs were meant for sacrificial purposes, but surely Noah did not need to sacrifice 6 pairs and keep just 1 or 2 pairs alive. I think the more reasonable explanation is that just as Abel started animal husbandry shortly after Adam and Eve were expelled from the Garden of Eden. So God must have determined that agriculture and raising domestic animals would be the main occupation for man after the flood, just as it seemed to have been from very early on in man's history. God was going to sanction the eating of meat. So raising animals for this purpose seems to be a more logical reason for 7 pairs of clean animals than just 1 or 2 pairs for the unclean ones. In regard to the ark, it also had to have some type of advanced technology incorporated into it to serve the purpose of saving mankind and beast kinds alive. Noah was asked to gather food, so it needed some type of refrigeration systems. Eating food also produces waste, so some type of waste disposal systems would also have been necessary. Also, the ark was sealed by God, so it would have required some type of ventilation systems for air circulation. I visualize the ark more as a modern cruise ship than a rickety wooden boat that most people picture it to be. However, there is no way for us to confirm the exact design and build of the ark in the present time. All right, on to verse 4. For yet 7 days, and I will cause it to rain upon the earth 40 days and 40 nights. And every living substance that I have made will I destroy from off the face of the earth. From verse 4, it would appear that the animals went into the ark just 7 days prior to the beginning of the flood. God also specified that every living substance, which means living creatures or creatures that have life in them, would he destroy from off the face of the earth. This is an important understanding that both at the time of Satan's flood and in Noah's flood, there were creatures like the sons of God men and the giants who somehow survived, either inside the earth or in the waters of the earth. This is why the giants appeared or reappeared almost immediately after the flood and built cities across the earth in a very short period of time. The Bible records many such cities in Canaan, and they're in the land of Canaan, and there are stories in every culture of giants and also of some other species, some of them like hybrid creatures like the Naga or serpent people coming out of the earth or out of the waters. The Bible does teach that in addition to worlds on the surface of the earth, there are worlds inside the earth and inside the waters and also in the heavens. So this God's creation is filled with far more creatures and living things than we actually can think. Even on the earth, there are like not just billions, there are probably like trillions of creatures that exist right here on the earth. And we have little knowledge of most of them, but that what we see with our eyes is only a very, very small percentage of the actual number of creatures that exist in God's creation. When one day we finally come to understand the extent and size of creation and the number of living beings that are in them, what can I say? We'll truly be blown away. So, the answer to the question as to where the giants came from after the flood, people ask that question that there were giants in the earth in those days, which we read about in Genesis 6:4, which days were before the flood of Noah. But then we read about giants, as for example, in the book of Deuteronomy and in the book of Numbers, when Moses sent the spies into the land of Canaan, they saw these giants, and they were very big people because the Bible tells us that these scouts, that were the spies that were sent out to spy out the land, they thought of themselves as grasshoppers in comparison to the size of these giants. So the giants appeared or reappeared on the earth shortly after the flood. Okay. So the answer as to the question as to where the giants came from after the flood, were they not all destroyed in the flood? Well, the answer is that some of them survived inside the earth where they may have continued to live even after the flood of Satan in Genesis 1:2. And in Genesis 6:4, there is an interesting phraseology. It says there were giants in the earth in those days. Every myth, every culture, mythology, cultures, myths, legends, they all have stories of these giants that live inside the earth. So, it's possible that these worlds existed, or these, places of habitation for these giants existed in the earth, inside the earth somewhere, and they managed to survive in there, from which they made a reappearance after the flood had dried the land, and they once again began to build, or possibly to just rebuild the cities that they inhabited or some of their kins had inhabited in the days of, before the flood. Okay, so those cities that were in Canaan, it is not necessary that they were all built anew. It's possible that some of them were already existing before the flood, and then these giants came out of the earth and they began to, repair them and to renovate and to use them once again. Okay, so this is speculation, but it does make, there is the question that, these giants were in the earth before the flood and after the flood is how. How did they survive? And my answer is that they must have survived inside the earth, and they may have continued to live where they actually were existing even at the time of the flood of Satan. So, that's where after the flood, after Adam was made, these giants appeared on the earth. They came from somewhere. And the answer, the most logical one, is that they were inside the earth. And so, as we shall read later, living beings that were on the surface of the earth died, but not every living thing that was in the earth at that time died. Then in verse 5, and Noah did according to all that the Lord commanded him. Verse 5 again confirms that Noah was a righteous man because he obeyed God and did everything that he was commanded to do. This is actually repeated a few times in Genesis 6 and 7 that Noah did everything that he was commanded to do. In Genesis 6:22, we are told, for example, in Genesis 6:22, we can read that Noah did as God he was commanded to do so by God. So twice, and even more than twice, Noah is commended in these chapters for being obedient to God and for following his instructions to the letter. He truly is one of the great men in the Bible, like Moses, and we are all here because of Noah. So we have to be thankful that this man was a righteous man who obeyed God. We should all be inspired by his obedience to God in literally standing against the whole world and still remaining faithful to God. So, verse 6, and Noah was 600 years old when the flood of waters was upon the earth. So, Noah had three sons after he turned 500 years old, but which you can read in chapter 5 in the genealogies of Adam, that Noah was 500 years old when he begot Shem, Ham, and Japheth. It is possible that it was around this time, when he was around 500 years old, that God spoke to Noah, and he commenced the process of building the ark. Many people teach that Noah was building the ark for 100 years, but that may or may not be true. They built some very fantastic worlds on the earth in those days, whose ruins may still be seen across the earth. So the people that inhabited this world, as I've spoken about in the past, beginning with Adam and Eve, they were not like Neanderthals or Stone Age people. They had advanced knowledge of technologies and building materials and designs with which they did build some very, very amazing worlds. Okay. So they were not Stone Age Neanderthals. They had some sophisticated technologies at their disposal. As we learned in Genesis 4 about the descendants of Cain, like Tubal Cain, who had advanced knowledge of metallurgy. So if Noah employed trained craftsmen, the story that goes is generally people think that Noah was out there, cutting down trees and one plank at a time building this ark. But the other possibility is, that there was a highly trained craftsmen that were available. And today, you want to build a ship or a plane or a car or something, you don't start doing it yourself. You hire people to do it. So it is possible that Noah may have employed trained craftsmen to build the ark. Then it is not necessary that it took 100 years to build. Nonetheless, it appears that Noah was aware for about 100 years about the coming flood. So the knowledge that there would be a flood from Genesis chapter 6 and a couple other places, we can surmise that that is when God spoke to him. But that flood did not come for another 100 years, which again, speaks to the faith of Noah, that even over the 100 years, when the flood had not yet, when God had told him it was going to come, but it hadn't come, he did not, he did not lose his faith in what God had told him, but continued to do everything that he was commanded to do. So he was 600 years old when the flood eventually came, and in one day took away all the surface dwellers. The flood, we are told, the rain and the flood and the fountains of the deep and heavens, that it was upon the earth for 40 days. And people generally again teach, that yeah, these people are scrambling up mountains trying to save themselves as the water is rising. No, that is not how the Bible describes the flood. As a matter of fact, Jesus gave us some description of this in Luke chapter 17. And what he seemed to imply, at least in those scriptures, is that it was on the very first day of the flood that everybody that was on the surface of the earth was destroyed. Okay. It continued to rain for 40 days after that, or 39 days after that, let's say. But that does not mean that, people died off slowly. It seems that it happened instantaneously on the very first day. So we can read in Luke chapter 17, chapter 26 to 20, in verses 26 to 29. So Jesus compared the day that the flood came to the day that it rained fire and brimstone on Sodom and Gomorrah. Just as all the inhabitants of Sodom were destroyed in just one day, as a matter of fact, probably in just 1 hour, so too it would appear from Jesus' description of the flood of Noah that the inhabitants on the earth were swept away in just one day. So we read in Luke 17:26, as it was in the days of Noah, so shall it be in the days of the Son of Man. They did eat, they drank, the married wives, they were given in marriage until the day that Noah entered into the ark and the flood came and destroyed them all. So it seemed that it all happened on that day, on the very day that Noah entered into the ark. Okay. Likewise, also as it was in the days of Lot, they did eat, they drank, they bought, they sold, they planted the building. But the same day the Lord went out of Sodom, it rained fire and brimstone from heaven and destroyed them all. So Jesus compared these two events, and what did they have in common? That, first of all, judgment of God was passed upon both these worlds, upon the world of Noah and the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah and some other places around there in the days of Lot. But we are told that, Sodom was destroyed on that very one day. So the other thing that they possibly have in common is that it was just the very first day that something happened that destroyed the life on the surface of the earth. So we shall read in a minute as to what it is that caused it to be so catastrophic and so sudden. Verse 7, and Noah went in and his sons and his wife and his sons' wives with him into the ark because of the waters of the flood. Of clean beasts and of beasts that are not clean, and of fowls, and of everything that creepeth upon the earth, there went in two and two unto Noah and the ark, the male and the female, as God had commanded Noah. So it seems that the ark was not boarded by Noah and his family or by the beasts and fowl until just 7 days before the flood. Okay? Because we are told in verse, I think in the previous verse, that, yet 7 days, God said, and he was going to bring this flood. And therefore, I think in a subsequent verse, you're going to read that. So it was only about 7 days prior to the flood coming that the ark was filled with the animals and then with Noah and his family. So this seems that the ark was not boarded by Noah and his family or by the beasts and fowl until 7 days before the flood. It would seem that even the beasts and the fowl were obedient to Noah as Noah was to God. The logistics of such an operation are wildly beyond our capacity even today. So without divine power at work, the ark would not have been built in the first place, and the gathering of all the beasts and fowls within just a 7 day span would be an absolute impossibility. How all this was accomplished is way beyond our understanding in this time, but I hope we will be shown the details of this incredible event sometime in the future when God, gives us the fullness of understanding as he has promised that he will do in once we leave this world and go on into the next stage. Verse 10, and it came to pass after 7 days that the waters of the flood were upon the earth. So you can see that, right? That they go into the ark and 7 days later the flood comes. So it was only 1 week before the flood that this ark became inhabited. It wasn't like 100 years or years and years ago. No, that's not how the Bible describes this time. In the 600th, verse 11, in the 600th year of Noah's life, in the second month, the 17th day of the month, the same day were all the fountains of the great deep broken up, and the windows of heaven were opened. And the rain was upon the earth 40 days and 40 nights. Verses 7 to 10 give us some details about the flood. It is commonly believed that the flood was a result of rainfall only from the sky. However, the rain may actually have followed the flood that covered the earth and destroyed all life in it. It seems that the flood came up from below the earth, not just from above it. And it was not just the rain was not just from the rain clouds. The water didn't just come from rain clouds, but a substantial quantity of water fell from above the firmament, where at least half of the waters from Satan's flood of Genesis chapter 1, verse 2 had been stored since day 3 of the recreation initiated by God in Genesis 1:3 when he said, "Let there be light." From Genesis chapter 1, verse 3, with this verse, "Let there be light," it began the process of recreation of the earth in particular and of the heavens, which had been destroyed by God's judgment upon Satan and those evil worlds that existed in the days of Lucifer and of the fallen or the angels that sinned. So if we compare the information given by Jesus in Luke 17 to verses 10 and 11 of Genesis 7, it would appear that the initial flood resulted from the fountains of the deep being broken up and the windows of heaven being opened. We can read of the fountains of the deep being established by God in Proverbs 8:28, where we read, when he first formed the earth, this was the wisdom of God describing that time when he first formed the earth. That's when he established the foundations of the earth. People think of clouds and rain being natural processes beyond anyone's control, but all of God's creation is fully in his control. The earth is merely a very large building, all of whose functions are managed and controlled by God's maintenance department. Every large building you can go when you go downtown, even like, it doesn't matter if it's like a 20-story or a 50 or 80-story tower, they all have a maintenance department. A lot of work goes into maintaining those buildings, okay? The water systems, the air ventilation systems, the waste management systems, like it was in the ark, they're all in place and they have to be maintained and kept in good repair for that building to function. The earth is very much like a very large building, over all of whose functions are managed and controlled by God's maintenance department, over which he has appointed various angels in different positions and capacities. We can read in the book of Revelation, for example, about the angel of the waters, okay, and about the angel that has power over the sun to, dial back the heat or to increase the heat that it is outputting and the light that it is outputting. So all these things are completely in God's control, and he has the switches to all the processes of what we think of as nature. God is the God of nature, okay? Nature doesn't run itself. God runs nature. And he has a whole armies of his employees, of the races of angels that are working in various capacities to keep everything functioning. It just doesn't function by itself. And even when it malfunctions, as it, what you might think of, for example, at the time of this flood, and lately we've been hearing a lot about floods, etc., for example, in Spain and even in the USA with this hurricane in Florida and Carolinas, etc. Those are not malfunctions. Those are that God himself, he is allowing or he is sending some type of form of judgment upon certain places. And that is why these events occur. They just don't happen by themselves. So as we can turn lights on or off, or turn water taps on or off, or increase the flow of the water in those taps as we desire, so can God do what he likes to all of his cosmos. He can cause the stars to fall down to the ground. He can make the sun burn much hotter. He can turn the moon into blood. He can have big mountains fall from the sky into the waters. He can do whatever he wants to. It's his creation. He's got complete and total power over all of it. So breaking up of the fountains of the deep just requires the proper technology to be in place, which God himself prepared when the earth and the heavens were being formed, about which we can read, for example, in Proverbs chapter 8. Now, continuing on into verse 13. In the self same day, Noah entered Noah and Shem and Ham and Japheth, the sons of Noah, and Noah's wife, and the three wives of his sons with them into the ark. They and every beast after his kind, and all the cattle after their kind, and every creeping thing that creepeth upon the earth after his kind, and every fowl after his kind, and every bird of every sort. And they went in unto Noah into the ark, two and two, of all flesh, wherein is the breath of life. And they went in, and they that went in male and female of all flesh, as God had commanded him, and the Lord shut him in. What we learn about Noah's wife and sons and their wives is that they did go into the ark with Noah. Whether they were commanded by Noah to do so or by God to do so and they obeyed, or they believed Noah's preachings and warnings is not known. But the fact is that they did go in to the ark with him. In the case of his three sons, we are told, like in Genesis 5, that they were born after Noah was 500 years old, and the flood came when Noah was 600 years old. So these sons were likely around 100 years of age. So they were like at least 90 plus years in age, okay? They were married adults. So they could have rebelled against Noah and not gone with him. Now, since these three sons were born when Noah was already 500 years old, okay, would suggest that Noah may have had other children before these threes, but those children of his did not go with him in the ark. They may well have rejected his preaching, as did the rest of the world at that time, and as did Lot's sons-in-law at the time of Sodom and Gomorrah. In the genealogy in chapter 5, Noah is the only one whose sons, first of all, he is the only one who has the names of three of his sons listed in that genealogy, whereas all the other patriarchs only are listing, the one son from whom the lineage was passed on that is mentioned. And secondly, most of them had sons, when they were like 70 and 80 and 30 and 40 years old. Noah was the only one about whom we are told that he had these three sons at 500 years of age. So it doesn't seem logical that he didn't have any children before then. I'm sure he must have had. Okay? But these children were not with him in the ark. So once Noah and his family and the beasts and fowl had gone into the ark, God shut him in. We're told that, and the Lord shut him in verse 16. Okay. So this means that the ark was sealed from the outside and was completely waterproof. This would also mean that it was sealed to outside air entering in without, being that they were not like doors and windows that were kept open during the time of the flood. And they didn't have like open decks, like it was almost seems from the way it was constructed that it has something like, like a coffin. Once you shut the door, then everything is sealed. That's how it seems this ark seemed to have been made. So when it was sealed, it was not just sealed to water, but it was also sealed to air entering in, being that they didn't have any doors and windows to open, or, there were not open decks as they have on ships and such. No, this was a different type of design. From such information about the ark, we can surmise that it had to have some fantastic technologies employed in its operations, for Noah and the other occupants of the ark were sealed inside for a whole year. As I told you, that they needed ventilation, they needed refrigeration, they needed waste disposal, and the other, things that were required to maintain not just 8 people. If it was just 8 people, that in itself would be require, much preparation to be able to survive for a whole year. But with all these animals, this ark was truly probably one of the best, vessels that ever existed in the history of the world. Verse 17, and the flood was 40 days upon the earth, and the waters increased and bore up the ark, and it was lifted up above the earth. From verse 17, we learned that the waters continued to increase upon the earth for 40 days. 40 is a significant number in the Bible. For example, Jesus was on the earth for 40 days. He was in the wilderness being tempted of the devil for 40 days, and he was on the earth for 40 days after his resurrection. The children of Israel wandered in the desert for 40 years, and there are other significant events related to the number 40 in the Bible. If the life on earth was destroyed on the very first day of the flood, then there has to be some greater reason as to why the waters continued to increase on earth for 40 days. One of the consequences of such an increase in the volume of water on earth would mean that the land area would be greatly reduced. Waters rose up from below the earth when the fountains of the deep were broken up, which would have been like massive geysers geysers of water breaking up the earth in ways that we cannot even begin to imagine. So it's just like, you can imagine like a major giant fountain under your house, as you see sometimes in cartoons and stuff, where they show you this big fountain of water lifting up a house into the air. Okay. But this, except in this case, it was not just be like, the size of one house. I think these fountains, when they were broken open, the force of water that came from beneath the earth must have been of such magnitude that we can't even begin to imagine it. Jesus warned in Luke 21, in chapter 21, that in the last days the seas would roar and the force of waters would be felt in terrifying ways upon the earth. However, in my estimation, the breaking up of the fountains of the deep in Noah's days was of much greater magnitude than what will be seen on the earth in the time of the tribulation. I believe that the land mass of the earth was far greater at the time before the flood than it is today. The waters of the fountains of the deep must have been contained in massive reservoirs under the earth before the flood. And it is these reservoirs that were broken up and the water rose up with explosive force. It must have literally liquefied the land above, which would have sunk to the bottom. Then it would leave no room or little room for these reservoirs, which would mean that the waters had no place left to return back to and would therefore remain on the earth, not beneath it, as they did in the past. The question of what happened to these waters, I will speculate on a little bit later, but it is definitely, it is for sure that, since the geography of the earth itself changed, that the land and the waters and how they shifted and how they changed in size, it is impossible to know for sure, but we can say something did happen in a very catastrophic manner to the earth at that time. Moreover, the waters that poured down when the windows of heaven were opened would also have greatly increased the volume of water on the earth than it held before that time. Okay. We are told the windows of heaven were opened up. And just imagine that, not just a little rain falling, but like oceans of water dropping instantaneously from the sky. Would that be enough? Take away everything that was on the surface of the earth at that time in a very, very short, within a matter of minutes and hours, within one day, as Jesus taught us in Luke 17? I think so. So, it was the earth was it was being deluged both from below and from above. And it is once these fountains and the windows of heaven, fountains had been broken up and the windows of heaven been opened up, that I think that the water literally covered the earth all over within just a matter of a day. And that was enough to destroy all life that was on the surface in one day. Because, before that time, we are told that these people were, they were busy going about their life. They were eating, drinking. Nobody was really concerned. They must have thought that Noah was a madman, or, whether even Noah built the ark in front of the people. We don't know all the details of that part, but nobody really believed him. They were just going about their life. And then Jesus said, the flood came, and in that day, it took them all away. So that is one way that would happen, especially with these, oceans of water dropping from above. Can't even begin to gain. We can't even visualize what that would be like. Recently there have been some very, very big storms and a lot of rain and water has come down. But I think it is nothing like the water that came down from above in the days of Noah. Moreover, the waters that poured down when the windows of heaven were opened would also greatly increase the volume of water on the earth than it held in the past. But nowhere in the Bible are we told that God returned these waters above the firmament once the flood was over. Once they had fallen to the earth, it seems that these waters have remained on the earth and are still here to this very day. I have speculated in the past that the population of the earth at the time of Noah may well have been greater than it is today, possibly much greater. The population consisted not only of the children of Adam and Eve, but also of the sons of God, men who were on earth before Adam, and also of the giants, and possibly other inhabitants about whom we are no longer aware. So the purpose of the waters prevailing for 40 days, and if may well have been to destroy the many evil worlds that existed on the earth in those days, that is, to destroy certain lands along with the inhabitants, thereby reducing the landmass of the earth or spreading it in such ways that certain regions would become inaccessible to the other regions of the earth. For example, in Genesis 4, we read about Cain, leaving the land of Eden and going to the land of Nod. So it is possible that at this time, one of the consequences of not just the fountains of the deep being broken up and the windows of heaven being opened, but the 40 days of rain would be that, to change the earth in such a way that first of all, it would, just sweep away many of these evil worlds that existed on the earth, going back to the days of Satan, but also then to, perhaps split it. That, I am firmly of the belief that there are land masses on the earth today about which we have no knowledge. And that may be that God did it at that time, that these regions from which, the inhabitants were mingling with each other at that time, they then became separated and inaccessible to one another. Just speculation, but I think that is a very distinct possibility that that's what happened. This is just, again, like I said, speculation on my part, but the fact remains that the geography of the earth was substantially changed after the flood of Noah, as was its ecology. Now, verse 18, and the waters prevailed and were increased greatly upon the earth, and the ark went upon the face of the waters. And the waters prevailed exceedingly upon the earth. The word prevail, again, it means to overcome something. So the earth was literally overcome by these waters, and it means that it overcame the inhabitants that were on the earth at that time. And the waters prevailed exceedingly upon the earth, and all the high hills that were under the whole heaven were covered. Okay. So as the waters rose, the high hills became covered first. And then in verse 20, 15 cubits upwards did the waters prevail, and even all the mountains eventually became covered. Verses 18 to 20 detail how much water was upon the earth. It appears that the waters rose by a height of 15 cubits, which is about 20 feet or around 3 meters above even the highest mountains. One thing we do learn from Genesis and elsewhere in the Bible is that there were rivers, hills, and mountains on earth even from the time of Adam. And these mountains may even have been higher than our present day highest mountains like Mount Everest. Various reasons are given by so-called science as to how mountains came about. They say this plate collided, that plate collided, and these mountains came about. But the simple fact we learn from the Bible is that God created hills and mountains and valleys and rivers from the beginning of the earth, as we read about hills and mountains being formed. For example, in Proverbs 8:25, which tells us, before the mountains were settled, before the hills was I brought forth. The magnitude of the destruction in the flood of Noah is impossible to fathom, which also teaches us how great must have been the evils of man, the evil imaginations of his heart that led to so much violence that God had to send such catastrophic judgment upon man and upon the earth that God had given to man. Okay. So again, people teach, it was the hybrids and sons of God and the Nephilim that brought the flood. The Bible teaches no such thing. Verse 21, and all flesh died that moved upon the earth, both of fowl and of cattle, and of beast, and of every creeping thing that creepeth upon the earth, and every man. All in whose nostrils was the breath of life, of all that was in the dry land died. And every living substance was destroyed, which was upon the face of the ground, both man and cattle, and the creeping things and the fowl of the heaven, and they were destroyed from the earth. And Noah only remained alive, and they that were with him in the ark. So verses 21 to 23 again disprove the false teaching that there were fallen angels running around on the earth, okay, which caused God to send the flood. Both in chapters 6 and 7, it is clearly taught that the judgment came because of the sins of the creatures of flesh, mainly because of the evils of man who is flesh and blood, which stemmed from the evils of his heart. No mention is made of any angels or creatures of spirit upon whom God pronounced judgment. As a matter of fact, we can read in Jude and in 2 Peter that the angels had already been judged and thrown down to hell, even a long time before Adam was formed and placed in the Garden of Eden. Since judgment was upon flesh, which had corrupted God's ways upon the earth, it was the man of flesh that was destroyed from off the earth, along with the creatures over whom man had been given dominion. It is also clarified that only the creatures that were on the dry land died, not the fishes in the seas or in the waters, or any other creatures that may have had some dwelling place inside the earth or in the waters of the earth, as I speculated about the giants. This little detail that only creatures in the dry land died, only those creatures upon the face of the ground died, would suggest that there were creatures, not from the race of man, but of the giants and possibly of the sons of God, men, who also somehow survived this flood, which has been the most catastrophic event on earth since Adam was formed and placed in the Garden of Eden. And finally, in verse 24, and the waters prevailed upon the earth 150 days. The chapter ends by telling us that the entire earth remained covered with water for 150 days, after which the waters began to recede. Obviously, the waters that covered the highest mountains will recede first and gradually continue to go down until the surface of the earth became dry land once again. It is interesting as to what happened to so much water, which was far greater in volume than it had been in the past. One explanation would be that the present time land masses were lifted up by the waters, and there may be some truth to what we are told that the continents are just floating on water. See, there were the fountains of the deep that were broken up, and the water was released from there. But those fountains or those reservoirs were designed for a much smaller volume of water. They were not meant for this water that would come from above the firmament when the windows of heaven were broken up. But these waters, so these continents floating in water would perhaps explain that the volume of the water, it goes much deeper today than it did back in the time of Noah. That these waters at that time may not have been very deep at all, because the earth at that time was attached to the bottom of the seabed, whereas now we are told that these continents, they're simply floating on top of the water, which means there's water underneath all of the land that exists on the earth today. But the fact remains that these waters had to go someplace to go down as they did in the past when the reservoirs or the fountains of the deep were first established by God. We are not told the truth of the geography of the earth. Okay, everything we're taught about the geography and what this earth's shape is, and what land masses exist where, it's pretty much all of it is a lie. So, we don't know what the shape of the earth, we don't know the size of the earth. As a matter of fact, Job asked, God, I think God asked Job, have you measured the breadth of the earth? I think the breadth of the earth is far greater. God implied in that scripture, it is not possible for man to measure it out. But here we are told by so-called science about the exact dimensions of what it is. What is the diameter? What is this, the radius, this and that, when it is not even a ball. It's a flat plane whose breadth is something we cannot even begin to fathom, okay? So we are not told any truth about the geography of the earth, so we can only speculate as to what lies below us. and tell you, oh, it's like a little magma and it's this and that. That's all nonsense, okay? It's all some type of theories that people come up with. Nobody has gone down there and explored what's down there. But what we do know from the Bible is that, the Bible tells us that God established the earth upon the floods or upon the waters, which you read about in the book of Psalms. So my speculation would be as to what happened to these extra waters is that they are below the land masses and they have lifted up the land higher. And so the land is like a floating vessel which just floats on top of the waters. And the depth of the waters in earth has gone down, has increased greatly since the flood of Noah. One other possible explanation may be that these extra waters froze and became what we know as Antarctica. We understand that the weather and the climate changed after the flood. And, Antarctica, which is another very interesting place and alive, we are told about what it is. But basically, it's like these massive ice walls that surround the Earth, which is circular in shape. It is not a ball, it's a flat circular area which is surrounded by these waters, by these walls of ice. And so it is possible that, it is all these extra waters that came down from above the firmament in the days of Noah. They froze around the earth where it was colder, and they have become these ice walls, which we call Antarctica. Okay. Again, so much has been hidden from us, but the Bible does raise questions about everything we have been taught. And, we can speculate about some of these answers through some reasoned speculation. And again, we shall find that it is the Bible that provides the most logical explanation, not so-called science. All right, my dear friends, so that brings us to the end of chapter 7. And, like I said, next week I will try and finish off with chapter 8 and 9 about this flood. And then we shall continue on into chapter 10 and 11 of the book of Genesis.
Build upon the rock you all. Build upon that rock you all. Don't you build upon the sand. Build upon that rock you all. Don't build upon the sand. Did you think life's answer light in a lover's paradise? And tried to win some happiness with a loaded paradise. But as you wallow around and you lust and you roll around and you bloom, you were riding on a losing horse. Don't you ride it to your doom. Build upon that rock you all. Don't you build upon the sand. Build upon that rock you all and stand beside the Lamb. Have you tried to buy the world and pay the debt you owe? And somehow buy some happiness with a big old pile of dough? Oh, let me tell you now, my friend, you cannot buy a soul. Someone else has bought you out, someone has paid your toll. So build upon that rock you all, don't build upon the sand. Build upon that rock you all, upon the great I am. Have you built up on the boast of just how good you are? But when the storms of life come down, your old building don't go far. It's a great false front that we leave behind, but it's merely sticks and hay. But if we build upon that rock, we have a mansion some sweet day. Jesus is that rock you all, yes, Jesus is the man. Jesus is eternal love and he will forever stand. Jesus is that rock you all, this world is made out of sand. Jesus is eternal love and he will forever stand. forever stay. He will forever stay.